The meeting is spared that one.
Oh, sorry. It's a very good judgment. Sadly, we're not reviewed in a great judgment. Not there.
You were just giving me the.
Yeah.
Oh no, what this is all about, looks. Yeah, that's you responsible for whatever.
You're the senior instructor.
All stand. Coronial Court now stands. Please be seated.
I call Sergeant Evan Kelly.
Sergeant Kelly, before you give your evidence today, do you promise to tell the truth?
Yes.
Thank you.
Formality, but can I ask you to repeat your full name for the record?
Evan Kelly.
And your current rank?
I'm an acting senior sergeant, watch commander in Alice Springs.
And where are you currently? Oh, Alice Springs,
Yep.
I'm sorry. You've provided a couple of documents to the coroner, is that right?
Yes.
The first of those documents is a recorded interview that you gave on the 18th of December 2019.
Yes.
That's 7-72, Your Honour. There was a recorded interview on the 29th of January 2020.
Yes, that's correct.
That's 7-73. And you gave evidence at trial across 2 days on the 9th and 10th of February 2022.
Yes.
Your Honour, there 19-22 and 23 respectively. Are you currently working as a watch commander when you're on duty?
Yes.
Can you tell Her Honour something about the role of the watch commander?
As the watch commander, you have oversight of basically all the police assets and members from Elliot south to the South Australian border on any given shift. You have oversight of all of the custody, so anybody in the watch houses. You need to conduct regular reviews of that, conducting audits of promised jobs, deployment of resources to critical incidents, and basically you report anything that's out of your scope up to the Territory Duty Superintendent. And
in terms of chain of command, directly underneath you, you'd have a number of shift sergeants or patrol sergeants?
Yes, normally a shift sergeant, but at times we've got different groups working. Sometimes there's a foot patrol with a sergeant and posse sergeants and that sort of thing.
And underneath the sergeants you have constables and senior constables, members of the individual patrol groups, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
So in terms of supervising individual constables or senior constables, first point of contact is the sergeant?
Yes, that's a chain of command, that's correct.
And ordinarily the senior sergeant or watch commander wouldn't get involved in supervising a constable unless there was some issue that was elevated to them by a sergeant, is that right?
Normally, sometimes, because of the way the station's set up, sometimes if a sergeant is out on the job and a constable's in the office and he needs some advice, they'll come straight into the watch commander, and I'm open to that.
Okay. But in other circumstances, the person that a constable most often goes to would be their patrol sergeant.
Yeah, that's a chain of command.
Okay. Now, I want to take you back to November 2019. You were relatively new to the Alice Springs Police Station, is that right?
Yes.
Where did you come from?
Darwin. I was spent 2 years in the gangs task force up there.
in your first recorded statement, you say that you'd only really known your patrol group for a couple of weeks at that time.
Yeah, that's correct. I've since reviewed the roster, and I think I was transferred to that patrol group, and prior to the 6th, I'd only served 3 days on that actual patrol group. So.
Okay, so all right, is it fair to say that you were still getting to know them and building trust?
Yes.
One police officer has given evidence in the inquest that as a young constable, relationship with older and more senior police officers is really important as you're finding your feet. It might be a while since you were that junior, but does that ring true for you?
Certainly. I know as a junior constable, when I came out of college, I went to Catherine, and I had the benefit of the majority of my patrol group in Catherine were senior constables with 7 to 10 years service, so they were very experienced, and you look to them for your guidance. Some patrol groups here at the moment, we don't have that luxury. We are, for want of a better term, a very junior station. We have a lot of junior members here, so it's incumbent upon the senior members here that we provide the junior members with that support and guidance.
I think it was Superintendent Nobbs also said that he thought that possibly the two most important ranks in some way in the NTPF hierarchy were the senior constable and sergeant, because they were the I suppose, more senior roles that were most frequently directly supervising junior police officers.
Certainly, the sergeants and senior constables spend time on the road with the junior constables. They'll attend jobs with them, whereas a watch commander is more office bound, assessing jobs that come across our CAD screen. So. A sergeant or a senior constable on the road can not only assess the administrative side of things when the constables are doing their paperwork, but also how they're interacting with people on the road.
Is it also fair to say that, you gave evidence a moment ago that it takes a little bit of time to develop trust between the sergeant and the patrol group. Once developed, is it fair to say that those patrol groups, if they're operating effectively, harmoniously, can be quite tight, very close?
Yeah, you spend a lot of time together, and the circumstances of our job are that at times incidents happen where you're relying on people in your patrol group for assistance. You're relying on them to do what they're trained to do. You do become a pretty tight-knit unit.
In a small jurisdiction like Alice Springs, they also end up being your mates.
Yeah, correct.
And so you might look to them for, things like emotional support if you're having a hard time or if you need to talk about your work.
Certainly. Throughout my entire career, that's been the way it is. Quite often a lot of people have their best friends in the police force, so that's where you turn to for your support.
I want to ask you some questions about the 6th of November and 7th of November. Before I do that, I just want to acknowledge that you have traversed this account on a number of occasions now, in writing and at trial. So I'll ask you some more focused questions. We'll just not tell you other details and just try and move through it swiftly. I want to ask you about the beginning of your shift on the 6th of November. I think your evidence was that Kumanjayi Walker's outstanding breach was brought to your attention during a handover.
Yes.
Okay. It was in the handover sheet.
Your Honour, Your Honour,
Yes.
I'm sorry to do this, but would you ask Mr. Coleridge if he would renew his earlier undertaking and stand closer to the mic so that we can hear him?
Your Honour, might I have leave to sit down?
Yes, we'll try and sort that one out for you.
Much obliged, Your Honour, and Mr. Coleridge.
As long as you don't tell me I have to sit down because I'm too soft again. So, from the Promise audit reports, it looks like you accessed the Promise record for the breach report itself.
Yes, that's correct.
And then your usual practice probably would have been to hold a handover meeting in the muster room.
Yes,
Can you tell Her Honour, and that would have been at around about 7 a.m. that day, if that's when your shift commenced.
that's correct.
What does a handover meeting involve?
Your muster briefing involves a handover of any outstanding matters from the night before. So sometimes we'll have potentially an arrest in custody that is intoxicated, that we have to wait for them to sober up to complete the file, offer them the opportunity to interview. We'll have outstanding arrest targets. Sometimes there'll be a missing person or a concern for welfare that we have to look for during the day. It's basically anything that's outstanding that hasn't been cleared up from the day before, any critical incidents or hotspots that we need to target. So perhaps there might be a suburb in Alice Springs that's been targeted for property crime overnight that we might have to go and look at. Unlawful entries that haven't been attended overnight that need attending.
And a part of that meeting would involve, I take it, allocating jobs to members of your patrol group.
Yeah, so generally what happened back then was you would have a printout of the actual promised jobs and you would hand that to a member for follow-up.
As best you can recall, you allocated the task of following up the breach report for Kumanjayi Walker to Constable Rolfe during that muster briefing.
Yes, I believe so.
And you might not have known it then, but the promise records reflect that Constable Rolfe then accessed the promise record at 7:07 a.m.
Yes, that would be expected.
And would 7:07 be around about the time you come out of the muster meeting?
Yes.
Can I ask you, I mean, you might have answered it with your answer that you'd only been rostered on for 3 days, but was there a particular reason you chose Constable Rolfe? Was it random?
No. Quite often you'll have a pile of follow-ups, potentially 5 to 10 follow-ups for the day. And as a general rule, unless it's something specific like a follow-up that requires a female officer, the follow-ups can be random. It also depends on members' workload.
All right. I want to now jump forward to 3 o'clock the next day. This is the 7th of November. Now, we know that at around about 6 p.m. the night before, Lanyon Smith and Chris Hand were threatened with an axe by Kumanjayi Walker. You're aware of that?
Yes.
Yeah. Now, you started your shift at about 3 o'clock on the 7th.
That's correct.
And as usual, you had your muster briefing.
Yes.
And either during or very shortly after that meeting, Constable Rolfe brought the axe incident to your attention.
Yes.
And effectively, he was just doing his job, what you'd told him to do, following up the Kumanjayi Walker breach.
Yes, that's correct.
All right. Can you recall what he told you?
I don't believe he told me anything at the time. I was when I was first made aware of it, I was in the shift supervisor's office, and I can't recall who asked me to come and have a look at the footage.
I take it you did have a look at the footage.
Yeah.
And I think you were taking to this at trial, but the promise records show that Constable Rolfe accessed the promise record for the body-worn footage at around about 3:16 p.m. Would that have been around about the time you came out of the shift supervisor's office?
Yeah, I would assume so.
Okay. Can you recall who was present?
Not exactly, but it would have been at some stage. I would have requested, or Constable Rolfe would have requested everybody in the PG come and have a look at that footage.
At various points in time, I think you've said that Constable Rolfe was there, Mitch Hanson,
Yes.
Shane King,
Yes. I believe so.
Bonnie.
Yep.
James Kirstenfeld.
Everybody that was on shift that day would have been there present at some stage.
All right. And you've already given this evidence, but just for honour's benefit, there was some discussion about the seriousness of what you had seen.
Yes.
Can you tell Her Honour something about that?
We've all seen the video, and obviously it is quite a serious incident with obviously the potential for an injury to either the members that were there or Kumanjayi Walker. I don't recall any specific comments because there were so many people there. In explanation of that, we've got CCTV footage in the muster room, and we watch CCTV footage quite regularly with a lot of people there in relation to incidents that happen downtown and that sort of thing. So it's not a common practice to sort of note down who's there with you watching footage and what people say. Obviously, everybody was taken aback a bit with the seriousness of the incident.
Just for clarity, I'm not going to be suggesting that there's anything unusual. It strikes me that this probably happens, a dozen times a day. Can I just ask you about one comment that you did mention and ask you to provide a little bit more detail? I think in your first or second recorded statement, you said that you recall making some comments to your patrol group about a lack of situational awareness. Can you explain what that meant?
Yeah, situational awareness is basically not allowing yourself to get into a position where you're cornered or can't get out. Obviously, it's very difficult when you're inside a house and you're making inquiries or something of this nature happens, but your situational awareness is knowing what's around you, knowing your escape routes and somewhere where you can find either hard cover if it's a firearm incident or different type of cover if it's an incident involving an edged weapon or just an aggressive person.
I want to jump forward to about 6 p.m, which is the attempted arrest at Walbury Camp. Now, I think your evidence has been that one of your patrol group was provided with information that Kumanjayi might be at a house in Walbury Camp, correct?
Yes.
Yep. Now, there was a briefing in the Bunnings car park not far from the Walbury Camp.
That's correct.
Constable Kirstenfeld referred to this as a bonnet briefing.
Yes.
And, that says what it means.
Yep.
You were at another job, I think, and arrived about halfway through the briefing. Is that right?
That's correct.
And Constable Rolfe was conducting the briefing.
That's correct.
And you were satisfied watching that he was doing a good job of briefing the other members of his patrol group?
Yes, for want of a better term, it's a pretty standard briefing when you're going to do a cordon and call or cordon and contain operation at a house.
I'll just take you briefly to the arrest. It has been the subject of evidence and is objectively recorded in body-worn footage from, I think, at least 3 of the members who attended. It's fair to say you did cordon the house.
Yes.
Someone knocked on the door. There was no answer.
That's correct.
You've just got to verbalise. So we can
that's
record
correct.
Now, you then had a discussion about what you would do. Is that correct?
Yes.
And what did you decide you would do?
We didn't actually have reasonable grounds to believe that he was in there. The evidence or the information that we had in relation to Kumanjayi Walker being in that specific premises wasn't, I couldn't satisfy myself that he was in there. So therefore, legally, we didn't have any grounds to enter the premises. It was all locked up. There was no indication when we arrived there of any noises in the house or anything like that. So. We made the decision to leave.
I think the extent of the information that you did have was something like he'd been seen there earlier that day or possibly seen there earlier that day.
Yeah, and we'd also had an email previously from Sergeant Kent, that was on the 30th, I believe, where they nominated 3 different houses in Walbury Camp. So
I take it that, if you believe that someone might be in one of 3 houses, you can't search all 3 till you found them. No, you need to believe that they're in an actual house.
That's correct.
Okay. And just to clarify, in the Northern Territory, in order to search a house to effect an arrest under warrant, you need to believe, not suspect, that they're in the house.
Yeah, it's reasonable grounds to believe under Section 126A. Which
is a higher standard than suspect.
Yes.
Now, obvious question, but you also didn't have permission from anyone to enter?
No.
And you couldn't have just asked any old Aboriginal person in Walbury Camp for permission? No. You need to satisfy yourself that you're getting permission from the owner of the premises.
That's correct.
Would you ordinarily ask some questions in an attempt to identify a person if you're seeking permission?
I believe some of the other constables that were there that day went across the road and asked some people that were sitting in the yard across the road whether they'd seen Mr Walker at the house or anybody else at the house, and they couldn't confirm that they'd seen him there either. So,
and I take it all of those discussions occurred in the presence of the patrol group?
in relation to not entering the house, yeah,
Okay, everyone understood why you weren't going in?
that's correct.
Okay. The 9th of November, I'm not going to ask you any questions about what happened during the day. You were tasked to a critical incident involving a bus.
That's correct.
Okay. And I think you didn't even know when you were dispatched to that incident that the IRT had been sent out to Yuendamu.
No, I came into work early and was immediately dispatched to a bus rollover, a tourist bus rollover about 200 kilometres south. And I wasn't aware that anybody on my PG had been dispatched.
You found out a little bit later that evening that a shooting had occurred in Yuendamu?
Yes, we after the incident with the bus was finished and we were returning, as soon as I got into phone range south of Alice Springs, I rang the watch commander. And at that stage, that's when I was informed that there'd been a shooting.
And you gathered eventually that the shooter was Zachary Rolfe?
Yes.
Okay. You attended the hospital, the Alice Springs Hospital, at around about 11 p.m. that night.
That's correct.
Can you recall who you attended with?
Bree Bonnie and a farm.
Bree Bonnie and
A farm. Nwaka Asaji, I think is how you pronounce his last name.
And you say that was a welfare check?
Yes.
And you're pretty clear in your recorded statement that you made a point of not asking anything about what happened.
That's correct.
What was your reasoning there?
Basically because in relation to the death in custody and obviously where we are now, I didn't want to be called to give evidence in relation to things that Zach had told me, so it was purely a welfare check.
Yeah. You also say, and this was in response to a question, you made a point of not asking anything, but you didn't give members in your patrol group a direction not to ask him anything. Can you recall being asked those questions in your recorded interview?
No. But no, I didn't give them any direction to speak to him, no.
In hindsight, can you see that it might be helpful for senior officers to give that kind of a direction to junior officers in their patrol group?
Yes, certainly.
I take it that you knew about the general order into deaths in custody in 2019?
Yes.
But there's been some evidence that some of the junior members in your patrol group didn't know or hadn't read the document?
Yes.
Do you think it could be helpful for there to be a clear stipulation in that document that when an incident like this occurs, one of the patrol sergeant's responsibilities is ensuring that everyone in their patrol group who might be connected to the incident is given a direction of that kind?
Yes.
I want to ask you some questions about what's been called a barbecue, but we understand from Senior Constable McCormack that there was no cooking. This was on the 11th of November at
Yes.
Constable Zachary Rolfe's house. Can you recall any of the conversation that occurred at that barbecue?
No, not really. When I first turned up there, there was a number of members already there. The television was on pretty loud in the lounge room. It wasn't long after I arrived there, we went and sat out the back, and we just had general conversation. I don't recall what it was about exactly.
Can you recall what time you left?
No, I don't recall what time I arrived or what time I left. I would say that if I was there for an hour, that would be the extent of it. I don't recall. It wasn't something that was crossing my mind at the time. But once again, I specifically didn't talk to anybody or didn't hear anybody talk about the incident itself.
Can you see, and again, I'm asking questions about hindsight, and I'm not suggesting that there aren't really good reasons why it might be important for a patrol group to, check in on each other's welfare. But in hindsight, can you see that when a group of police officers who've been involved in a critical incident like a police shooting then get together in an unstructured way and drink alcohol, there is a risk that people will talk about what's happened?
Yeah, certainly. And to be honest with you, I didn't give that any thought when I was going there. I assumed that given the time span between the incident and when we went to Zach's place was a couple of days, that anybody that needed to be spoken to, and this is a wrong assumption obviously on my part, that anybody that would have needed to have been spoken to by the senior investigators would have been, and they would have been directed or not directed to associate. But to be honest with you, I didn't give it any thought when I was going over there. I was going over to make sure that Zach and the other members of the IRT were all right. In saying that, I'd only sort of been on that patrol group for 4 days as well, so it would have been hard for me to tell in any case.
I take it from your answer that you've later learned that Constable Rolfe, for example, hadn't been directed to give an interview at that stage.
Yeah, that's correct.
Again, do you think that it would be useful for there to be some provision in the general order so that it's clear that there needs to be some communication between a patrol sergeant and the senior investigators to ensure that those steps have been taken before people are communicating with each other?
Yeah, certainly. It is in the general order that the senior investigator in charge should be speaking to the members involved and advising them of such. But I don't, due to the nature and complexity and distance of this incident, I don't know if that was possible at the time.
I want to turn to a topic now and ask you questions about one of your responsibilities as a patrol sergeant, which is the responsibility of, I'm going to use the word auditing, but you tell me if it's the wrong word, auditing use of force case note entries.
That's correct.
Is that terminology right?
Yes.
Yeah. Can you just tell her or perhaps I'll just lead you through it. When you use force as a member of the Northern Territory Police Force, save for in some rare circumstances like certain types of escorts, you're obliged to make a case note entry, is that right?
That's correct.
And that is logged onto Promise.
Yes. Pardon me.
It's your responsibility to task that to your supervisor.
Yes.
Now, if you're a constable or a senior constable, that'll generally be a sergeant, correct?
Yes.
It's then the sergeant's responsibility to audit the case note entry.
Yes.
You determine on the basis of the material available to you whether the force used was reasonable, proportionate, necessary and appropriate.
Yes.
And if you have any concerns, you then task them to your senior sergeant.
Yes, that was the case in 2019. That has since changed now, whereby all use of forces are audited by the senior sergeant.
Okay.
After the sergeant.
After the sergeant, yes. That was what I was coming to. So at least in 2009, 2019, the sergeant audited the use of force and didn't identify any issues, it wouldn't necessarily be tasked for review to the senior sergeant.
No.
Okay. I now want to ask you some questions about some specific or a specific use of force incident. Before I do, I just want to make something abundantly clear. I've had conversations with the Northern Territory Police Force and Constable Rolfe's legal representatives. I don't want to ask you questions about what you saw Constable Rolfe do or not do, and I don't want to ask you any questions about your opinion of what he did or didn't do. I want to ask you questions about two things. The first is what you did in the incident, and the second is the process that you then undertook to review Constable Rolfe's case note entry. Okay?
Yep.
The incident I'm going to ask you about involved a man called Albert Bailey, and the incident occurred on the 12th of October 2019. Can you recall what I'm talking about?
Yes.
Okay. Now, as a result of that use of force incident, during that use of force incident, Constable Rolfe perceived something and then used force against an individual,
Yes.
Mr. Bailey,
Yes.
and Mr. Bailey was injured during that use of force.
Yes.
He received 9 stitches. Constable Rolfe entered a use of force incident into the promise system. That's your
correct.
recollection?
Yes.
I might just show it to you if that's okay. Have you got a copy? Okay. You've got that in front of you, do you?
Yes.
On the first page, suppose 2/3 down, there are a couple of paragraphs that describe the incident.
Yes.
It includes a description of the force that Constable Rolfe and another police constable used. It's the second paragraph.
Yes.
And it provides Constable Rolfe's reasons for using that force.
Yes.
He feared, in effect, for the safety of another person.
That's correct.
Can you turn the page to page 3? At the top of page 3, there's a description of the injuries that were received.
Yes.
That's consistent with the description I gave you a moment ago.
Yes.
And the individual was hospitalised.
Yes.
At the bottom of page 3, there are then a number of headings that detail the supervisor. Can you see that?
That's correct. Yes.
And the name is Evan Kelly.
Yes.
And that effectively records that you were the person who audited that case note entry.
Yes.
Okay. And you deemed the use of force appropriate in the circumstances given pre-attack indicators exhibited, correct?
Yes.
Okay. I just want to ask you a couple of questions. It isn't clear from that description what material you reviewed in order to audit this case note entry.
That's correct.
Is it possible that the review involved you relying solely on your perception of the events rather than reviewing the body-worn footage?
Yes, I believe when I conducted the use of force audit, I was relying on what I saw at the time. Yeah.
Okay. Similarly, you gave a statement on the 20th of December 2019 for proceedings associated with the domestic violence order application.
Yes.
And you described the incident in that statement. At that time, do you think you'd watched the body-worn footage or you don't know?
I wouldn't be able to tell you honestly. I'm not sure.
I want to play you some footage now. Beck, can I have video 1, please?
Stay on the ground. Think you can hit a woman, eh? Think you can hit a woman?
Can you stop this being
Get
back?
ready to pause it
Can
when
you stop
I
this
ask you.
being back?
Give me that hand.
Oh, can you stop this being back? Can you stop this being back?
You're not.
Oh, can you stop this
Where's
being
that
back?
gloves on?
Can you stop this being back? Can I stop this bleeding, boss? Can I stop this bleeding, boss? Sorry, I'm gonna leave the woman.
You got him on gloves?
Can you pause it there, please, Beck? Is that you, Sergeant, who's just walking into frame?
No, I don't believe so.
Oh, okay.
I don't wear gloves.
I might show you something else then.
Yep.
Certainly you were involved in ground stabilising Mr Bailey during this use of force interaction.
Yes.
Beck, can we have video number 2, please? I just want to ask you if you can identify yourself in the incident.
Before that comes on, Your Honour, I'm not making an application, but I'd just like to raise the issue of whether Your Honour is considering making a non-publication order in relation to the footage, given it involves a person who's been the subject of an incident in circumstances which are somewhat sensitive. There are some privacy issues involved in all that.
I'll think about that.
Thank you.
I mean, at the moment it's being
Live stream.
live streamed.
Yes, it's a little different from the perspective of the individual involved. Should this material be entirely publicly available through the media? You know what he experiences in the course of this, and simply raising the issue for Your Honour's consideration.
Apparently this has been aired by the ABC previously, Your Honour. I think it's been...
We'll check that. But in any event, it's just been live streamed and posted.
Perhaps if we could press play. Sergeant, I'm talking over the video, but that is you assisting to ground stabilise.
That's correct.
Okay. We can stop that, please. My questions for you are this. Ground stabilising an individual like that constitutes a use of force.
Yes.
Indeed, it might have justified a case note entry of itself.
No, it's all one incident. You would place that on the
Same one.
yeah.
Okay. Sergeant, I'm not suggesting that you did anything wrong intentionally, but can you see how there might be at least a perception that there is a conflict of interest where a sergeant is actively involved in applying force to an individual and then audits the very use of force incident in which they are involved?
Yes, in hindsight, I wasn't involved in the actual use of force of the in relation to apprehending Mr. Bailey initially. I was assisting afterwards, but yeah, I can see that potentially if we're using force on somebody, the people involved shouldn't be doing a use of force audit.
But you also said the whole incident was one incident of use of force. So the initial application and ground stabilisation.
Yeah.
Who reviewed your use of force?
No one.
Or you did?
Yeah, basically.
Those are the questions, Your Honour.
Yes.
I just have one question. Hi. Yes, it looks like it's me. I've just got one quick question, Sergeant Kelly. I'm instructed by the Walker, Lane and Robertson families. Just in relation to after you viewed the footage of the axe incident, and you described it just now as being quite a serious incident with the potential for injury for members there, and have previously talked about it being quite shocking. I'm just wondering whether it ever occurred to you that for the purpose of the 7 November arrests, would you have considered calling in the IRT?
I can't say honestly at the time whether I considered the IRT. At the time, I wasn't fully conversant at the time with the functions of IRT or what they did down here. I was aware that there was an IRT, but I didn't, like I say, I didn't fully comprehend the nature of their duties.
But it didn't occur to you that you needed any more than the general duties patrol group?
No, from day to day, we have people that have alerts on them that they're violent and aggressive to police and will assault police and use weapons against police. But as a general rule, the more numbers that we can have of police attend an incident, the less likely it is that we have to use force or that force is used against us. And we went to Walker Camp that day with 6 members and conducted a cordon and contain operation. And that's pretty simple in normal terms. If we think there's somebody in there, we'll generally call them out. If they don't come out peacefully, then that's an opportunity for us to call the negotiators and see if we can get them while we maintain a cordon.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, just one more also about the use of force case note entry. So just wanted to clarify something. Do you only have to fill out the case note entry if some sort of accoutrements have been used? So if it's just a use of force by hand, you don't need to... No, it's if you use any strike, kick, blow, punch, anything, okay, you need to fill out a use of force report. Okay. Thank you. No further questions.
Any other questions?
Yeah.
Yes, Mr. Espy.
My name is Espy, here on behalf of Fernando. You discussed briefly today and also previously on previous occasions, including the trial, being involved in the search of the house at Walker Camp here in Alice Springs. You described prior to attending that attempted arrest, that search, yourself and other officers involved, looking at the body-worn footage of what we'll call the axe incident. You described the need to do that as in evidence at the trial. You described that as due diligence.
Yes.
Other things that you would do is check the target's criminal history and potential links to families and places and that sort of thing.
Yes.
Obviously, there's the fact that he wielded an axe and he fled from the arrest. What other things were you looking for? You mentioned situational awareness. What were you looking for? Other things you considered due diligence in firstly reviewing that footage?
In relation to us going to Walker Camp on the 7th, in our risk assessment? Or what a constable would do when he's doing his due diligence?
What were you looking for when you were looking at the video footage? What does it tell you?
Yeah, well, it gives an indication of the potential for somebody to use violence. We review footage all the time. Sometimes footage from members that have been involved in an incident ends up in training packages as an example of what to do or what not to do. So we quite regularly review footage, and it sort of gives you an insight and lets you be better prepared for situations.
Right. And other than looking at that footage, what other things do you consider as due diligence? What occurred in relation to?
So as a general rule, if you get given an arrest target, you'll go and have a look at their previous involvements on promise. Pardon me. Have a look at their links, so we can link vehicles, places, people to a person of interest. So it might be that 2 nights ago the person of interest was in a vehicle of a friend, and we might be able to go and conduct some inquiries at that friend's place to see where he was. So there's all the linking of people. you have a look at their criminal history to see what sort of propensity for violence they have, or their most recent criminal history. Some people have an extensive criminal history early on, and then at 22 or 24 years of age stop offending. So you can tell that somebody has been hasn't been offending for 5 years. So it's just getting a basic understanding of the person you're looking for, where they may be, and their propensity for violence or not.
You received this intelligence from essentially through a community or family member from Unamoo, that the intelligence that he may have been at this house, without inquiring as to where that came from. Obviously, it may be useful talking to the officers. Did you talk to the officers involved in the attempted arrest?
Yes, I still don't know to this day who actually got the information that he could have been at that house. There was information from the 30th of October, I believe it was, about him being or potentially being at one of 3 houses. But it's very difficult unless you get specific information and timely information to determine where somebody's going to be in these communities.
Just clarifying, other than that information, did you discuss with the officers or any police at Unamoo, including officers involved in the axe incident, any information they may have as to not so much whereabouts, but what they knew of Kumanjayi? Obviously, they work in this community and they may have known him a bit more intimately than...
Yeah, certainly. No, I didn't.
Do you think looking or being aware of any instances in a young person like Kumanjayi, instances of trauma or cognitive issues or suspected FASD or anything like that, would any of that sort of information assist you in preparing to arrest someone that, there's a likelihood that you may use violence or threats of violence to evade arrest? Yeah,
certainly under normal circumstances, if something like this happened on a community and the community police believed that the person had come into town and they had issues, we'd be informed at least via email or something like that. That's the normal circumstances. Sometimes the remote community police will contact our intel section and get an intelligence circular put out detailing those sorts of things, so that everybody in the station and the Southern Desert region's aware.
But none of those sort of inquiries?
No, not at that early stage, no.
I mean, you had time to make those sort of inquiries?
We did, but we were also considering it was getting dark that afternoon. The information that we had was, although it was loose information for want of a better term, it was timely information. They'd only received that information that afternoon. So we prefer, when you're going to attend an address, to look for somebody, not looking for them in the dark. It creates a bit of extra danger for us.
So the assessment or the observation of the video told you that he was obviously someone that may use violence. So that was an important aspect of preparing to arrest him. You've been asked whether or not, you say you didn't really know that the objective of the IRT, but you didn't feel the need to, for example, utilise a police dog?
No, I didn't at the time. I don't recall if they were rostered on duty or not. I didn't actually check, to be honest with you. We had, as I say, 6 members, and that's a part of our risk minimisation. The more members that we take to an incident like this, and this is not a rare thing in Alice Springs. Quite often we have people who, as I said earlier, we have alerts on them for using weapons, being violent. You might go and arrest them one day and they use force against us, and then the next day you might go and speak to them and they're compliant and happy. So you have to, temper when you're looking at going there with 6 members with the fact that there's also the chance that if we cordoned the house and spoke to Mr. Walker, if he was there, that he might have come out compliantly, and that's what we're aiming for.
And obviously you didn't see the need in this situation, given the information you had, including the footage. to carry long arms, AR-15s or anything else?
No.
Like that? And as you say, edge weapons are quite common here now.
Yeah, very common.
The cording off of the house is something that is there to prevent him from fleeing.
Yes.
What factors, knowing that he's someone that may have used a weapon or had used a weapon, what factors or what things do you take into account to prevent the need to have to, for example, draw your own firearm against him or to protect him from his own putting himself at risk of lethal force being
Yeah. Well, if you have a look at the video, the cordon of that house was quite loose. That allows you potentially, if a person of interest comes out of the house and they're unarmed and they try and run away, we can move in to apprehend them. But it also allows you to tactically disengage if somebody comes out of the house and they're armed. You know, we go to these incidents regularly, and normally they're resolved peacefully. Nobody wants to go, to an incident like that and have to use force against somebody. But the cordoning and containing allows you to tactically disengage, get behind a vehicle, and that sort of thing if you have to.
Right. You attended Walker Camp, so there were six members in total.
I think it was 6. Yeah.
You ultimately the house was empty, but you gave chase to him. You said in your statement, chase some guys or some community members.
Yeah, there was two men that ran off south into the bush.
Right.
So I think it was Mitch Hansen that chased them and identified them. I don't know why they were running.
They were physically apprehended.
I think he just caught up with them, from what I understand,
You know,
and they stopped.
Force with you or ground stabilised
No.
of that nature. Obviously, there are occasions when you have to use force or chase people, and that can be confronting for community members that people in general that don't understand why that's happening.
Yeah, certainly.
Do you have any knowledge as to why they ran?
No.
Do you accept that people can, particularly Aboriginal people, in places like other things, that they may have observed that sort of situation of police having to pursue or physically apprehend someone, that there can be a general fear amongst people of police?
Yes.
And that may be why they were frightened?
Yes, it could have been. I mean, I believe we had 3 cars and 6 members, so it could be intimidating.
And that's without weapons or dogs, that's just the presence.
Yes.
The presence. And you know what happened following that? Were they apologise to those men? Yeah?
I don't believe so. I think they were just asked their name and that was it.
You may not be able to answer this question, but you've also spent some time working in remote communities in Central Australia.
Not so much in Central Australia. I spent some time in Nooka on the Roper River, and I spent 2.5 years on Grid Island.
Perhaps remoteness is a factor, but I suppose your assessment of your arrest planning to go into Walker Camp, what differences would it make to you if that was arrest planning, travelling out to Yunnamoo?
Well, basically, on a remote community, you would have to seek access to further resources. Generally, you wouldn't be able to put, on most remote communities, you wouldn't be able to put 6 members together to effect an arrest. In most communities, the preferred method of arrest is family members bringing somebody to the station and handing themselves in. had extensive experience in that happening in on Grid Island in Nooka. Good communications with the ACPOs in remote communities saves a lot of time and effort in relation to searching for people and trying to arrest them when they can just be brought to the station.
Right. So you wouldn't, similar assessment of your arrest plan, you wouldn't see that have used AR-15s or police dogs
At Walbury Camp?
if it was a situation of arrest planning for a remote community.
Yeah, it would depend. Every circumstance is different.
And again, just finally going back to the due diligence and the things that you might, the checklist of things you might do, would it be of assistance if personal details, and we've heard Kumanjayi may have been someone that had FASD or other cognitive issues, had a history of trauma, those things that may contribute to his fight or flight response. Do you think those sort of details on the promise system or any sort of alerts would be useful information for police to be compiling in the future?
Yeah, certainly. There's an extensive system on the promise system for alerts that we can place on a person. So the way that system works is when you open up a person's promise identity, you can't get to look at any of their links until you've gone through and looked at all their alerts. So you have to look at the alert, finalise the alert, and some people have, I've seen upwards of 20 alerts for health and behaviour issues or there's bail alerts, violence alerts, things like that. So once again, we do have that system in place, but as with all computer systems, it's only as good as the user input.
So is there anything else that can be done to ensure those sort of things are? Obviously, when you have time.
Yeah, I mean, as I say, when we have people that are suffering from FASD or are violent and things like that, or do have medical issues, as a general rule, we're pretty good at recording that on promise. Obviously, there's going to be occasions where we do fall down, but from my perspective, I think we're pretty good at what we do.
But none of those issues will come to your attention in arrest planning on this occasion?
No, not on this occasion. They weren't brought to my attention.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Yes.
Just 2 minutes, right? That's all.
Yes, Mr. McMahon.
Oh,
Sorry, it was also Mr. I've always got to look it up. This issue.
Oh, no questions for this one.
Oh, none. Okay. Mr. McMahon.
Is it Senior Sergeant?
At the moment, yes.
Yes. Acting Senior Sergeant.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
We'll just call you Senior Sergeant. Act for the Current Group Committee of the Moves, the Justice Committee. I just want to ask you a couple of questions about the social gathering at Zach Ross' house. Do you know a policewoman called Brianna Bonnie?
Yes.
Is she at the barbecue, at the social gathering when you were there?
Yes.
She's previously given evidence about some of the things that were spoken of at the barbecue or the social function. Some discussion, and she says you were part of this discussion. Discussion about whether Zach had adhered to his training, discussion about each weapon equals gun, when would he be back at work and so on. Do you recall that discussion at the social function?
No.
Your recollection is that you didn't hear any talk about the incident on the 9th of November at the social function?
No, that's correct.
And you didn't give any direction not to talk about it?
That's correct.
Did you hear anyone else give a direction not to talk about it?
No.
And the things that I just put to you that Brianna Bonnie remembers talking about and being spoken about when there were a number of people there, including you, you don't remember any of it?
No. I'm not saying that they weren't talking about it, but I didn't hear anything specific to Yuendamu, and if I did, I wouldn't have engaged in it.
Putting aside the word union, what about the discussion concerning edged weapons, use of force, police training?
I don't recall anything, but I'm not saying, once again, I'm not saying that they weren't talking about it. It's just not something that stuck with me.
No questions, thank you, Your Honour.
Yes, Mr. Freckleton.
Thank you, Your Honour.
Before we do you, Mr. Freckleton, Mr. Sutner, do you have any questions?
Yes, very briefly, Your Honour.
Thank you.
Senior Sergeant, my name is John Sutner. I represent Sergeant Bones. Have you been a member of the IRT?
Have I been? No.
But you do know Sergeant Bowen.
Yes.
How long have you known him?
20 years.
And in that time, have you ever heard him use racist language?
No.
Have you ever observed disrespectful behavior towards Indigenous people by Sergeant Bones?
No.
Could you, in 3 sentences, sum up your view of Sergeant Bowen as a police officer?
In all my dealings with him, he's always been professional. He is a mentor to junior members. And I wouldn't be able to say anything adverse about his performance at work.
Thank you. No further questions.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Freckleton.
Thank you, Your Honour. Your Honour, I raised with you an issue about Mr. Bailey earlier. I've had constructive communication from a council assisting team. I raised the issue not in relation to police members, but in relation to a civilian. My understanding is that, in fact, there's material which is more in the public domain than I had any idea of already, so the issue does not need to be addressed.
Thank you.
Senior Sergeant, you've described the supervisory responsibility that you discharged in relation to the use of force incident involving Mr. Bailey.
Yes.
Since the time that you did what you did, has a new system come into force in relation to oversight over use of force?
Yeah, sorry, on the 9th of June 2020, there was a direction that... Yeah, on the 9th of June 2020, there was a direction that came out from Commander Laidler in Alice Springs. I'm not totally sure that it was a territory-wide direction, but all use of forces now, after being audited by the sergeant initially, also have to be tasked to the watch commander to audit.
And do you view that as a constructive additional layer of oversight?
Yeah, certainly.
And since the time of what you recorded on the use of force documentation, have you changed your own practice in terms of what you recorded? Can you tell Her Honour about the change that you've made to your own practice?
The use of force case note where I've written on this case note in relation to my comments, we now put substantially more in there. We also record whose body worn we've watched in relation to the incident. So sometimes there might be only one body worn of an incident, sometimes there might be 5. We've got to satisfy ourselves that we've watched the incident holistically and got the best appraisal of it before we commit ourselves to doing the use of force audit now.
And are you doing that as the watch commander now, the second audit?
And again, do you see that as a constructive extra piece of information which is available for anyone else who needs to look at that?
Yeah, well, even now with after the sergeant audits it and the watch commander audits it, if there's an unwarranted use of force or something's not right with the use of force, we're still required to task it to the territory duty superintendent or our divisional superintendent.
If there's any concern.
Yeah.
Have you ever disagreed with the original assessment?
At times recently, there was one where I disagreed with and requested that the sergeant send it further up the chain.
I'd just like to pass to the gathering which you attended at Zachary Rolfe's house. To summarise, why did you choose to attend when you didn't know Mr. Constable Rolfe very well?
In my opinion, and through the entirety of my career, sergeants, when I was a constable, and myself as a sergeant, have an obligation and a duty of care, basically to look after member welfare. So even though I don't know or didn't know at the time the patrol group, being absent from there at that time wasn't going to help me, become a part of the patrol group and a supervisor, if for want of a better term. It's important in my opinion that we do as supervisors and senior sergeants as managers, maintain the welfare of our members.
Can you identify other ways, in circumstances as complex as this case, where there'd been a death in custody and where investigations were ongoing, by which there could be appropriate ongoing checking of the members' welfare in the aftermath of such an incident, other than what took place on the Monday night?
It's a difficult scenario because there's different ways that members, approach working in the police force. A lot of members have the vast majority of their friends within the police force, and some like to knock off work and have friends completely separate from the police force. So it's obviously going to be dependent on the member and how he associates with other members when we're looking at a critical incident debrief and welfare. So on a patrol group where the members are very close and they're all involved in a critical incident and they all hang around together after work, it's going to pose some difficulties in being able to debrief them and have that welfare of their friends close. Obviously most police are friends with other people outside of their own patrol group, but certainly the organisation is undertaking a welfare review at the moment, and I've spoken with the superintendent in charge of that. I'm just waiting on some further information to come back to see what they've got, to see if I can assist or make any suggestions. At the moment, I think they're planning on putting a permanent welfare officer in Alice Springs. We've had welfare officers come in and out, whereas previously we had a permanent one. I'm not sure where we're at with that at the moment.
You would understand that family members of a deceased man might experience a level of discomfort on hearing through the proceedings of this court that a number of police got together within 48 hours of the death of their loved one and were talking with one another and drinking alcohol.
Certainly.
Did you have any intention of yourself to cause any offence to members of the family of Kumanjayi Walker by your attendance?
No, not at all. As I said, I went there to basically check on the guys' welfare and make sure that nobody was, suffering, for want of a better word, from the incident. And if they were or appeared to be, and although things were put in place for them already, that was part of my role.
What things were put in place already?
We have ESS, so anybody that's involved in a critical incident, we have online reporting, and they basically welfare contact the members to see if they're all right and need any further support. We also had, I believe, the police association. Brady Anderson was down here at the time providing support to members.
ESS.
Something support services. My apologies.
So you believed that someone from ESS would be in contact with each of the members?
And or the association. That would be a part of the investigation. Would be to ensure that their welfare was being looked after.
Tom, it's employees.
Employment.
No, we need today.
Thank you.
Follow up with the gold bell.
Yes, anything further?
What do you reckon about that?
Absolutely thrilled. I'll be very proud of you.
Yeah, they won't know what hit them in for asking
Thank you.
Glamour.
Acting Senior Sergeant, thank you for coming this afternoon to give your evidence, and the information you've provided is appreciated.
I won't be
Thank you.
confronting. I'll be wearing a black suit.
Nothing further
With a white
for this
shirt.
afternoon. Then we can adjourn the sorry, Mr. Reid?
Your Honour, may I be excused and have leave to reappeal if I'm required?
Yes, certainly, Mr. Reid, thank you. We'll adjourn to 9:30.
All stand. Coronial Court now stands adjourned.